The results of Smash Summon 8 were surreal to say the least. We had the first top 4 without any of the 5 original gods of Smash since MLG New York in 2006. IBDW beat S2J, Mango, Amza, and Hungrybox in bracket after going 0-3 in pools, and X finally proved once and for all that Pikachu can win a major. So needless to say, the top 10 rankings are in complete disarray after this event. So with this video, let's lay out the data for all of the contenders for the title of the best player in Melee right now. There are an unending list of factors that go into determining where a player should be ranked, but with this video, we're going to focus on 3 major ones, and I'll give you all the information while ranking each player on those individual metrics, so that you will have the ability to come to an informed decision about who you think the number 1 player is right now. The first metric we're going to look at is head-to-head records against the top talent. There's a lot to digest in this graphic, so we're going to compare players in smaller chunks to make it a bit easier. Let's start with Zayn and Amza, the 2 players with 5 losing head-to-head records. Both of their spreads pale in comparison to their fellow members of the top 8, but Zayn takes a slight edge over Amza for me, mainly due to his singular win against Plup, which shows his potential to take sets off of him later this year, but I could also see Amza being argued over Zayn because of how Zayn has only took those 2 sets off of Hungrybox at a regional event, and how hard of a brick wall Axe has been for him this year. After that, we have Hbox and Plup, who both have 4 losing records. The 2 don't overlap winning records on any players, so if you're looking exclusively at that, who has better head-to-heads could be determined by which group of 3 contains stronger players. But Hungrybox has only been dominated by 2 players this year, whereas all of Plup's losing records are dominations, which is a bit concerning. So I'd personally give Hungrybox the nod over Plup because of those wins and losing records, but if you put more weight into Plup's trio of winning records, I could see you flipping it the other way. This then brings us to the final 4 players who only have 2 losing records. Axe stands out as the clear number 1 here, as he's played against all 7 other players this year, has taken sets off of 6 of the 7, and has winning records against 3 of the 4 players he's met multiple times this year, which shows consistency against these guys. Wizrobe and Mango never having met so far this year puts us in a predicament. Wizrobe has never beaten Mango in a tournament set before, so should we punish Wizrobe and boost Mango for a set that hasn't happened? Personally, I think the wealth of historical data is enough to be held against Wizrobe for Mango to be considered above him, alongside the fact that Mango has only failed to beat Amza so far this year, and his pair of losing records to Hbox and Amza are stronger than Wizzy's versus Plup and Axe, not to mention Wizrobe's abysmal history against Plup on top of that. This would then leave Leffen as the second most consistent for me by only being dominated in 1 head-to-head and having the strongest pair of losing records. So if we were ranking players exclusively on their head-to-head records against other top players, here's what my personal ranking would look like. But we still got a whole lot more to talk about, so let's jump over to consistency. Our previous discussion on head-to-head records gave us a look at players' consistency at the top level, so we are going to exclusively focus on each player's losses outside the top 8 to get another perspective on a player's consistency. And at first, when you see this chart, you may think it's pretty simple to pick out who's the most consistent, but it's not just losses that we have to keep in mind. We also need to factor in tournament attendance when considering consistency, because going out to more events puts a player at higher risk to drop sets. And even with that being said, Axe is the clear outlier here. With a long list of losses across multiple events against players who play a variety of different characters, Axe clearly has the worst losses of anyone in this group. The bottom of this list continues on with Amza and Zayn, with Zayn taking 6 because of his significantly larger attendance, netting him losses on about the same level as Amza. Now with these 5 left, there's a lot of room for disagreement depending on how heavily you weigh certain factors. If tournament attendance only weighs minimally, Leffen should be your number 1, having suffered no losses outside the top 8, with Wizrobe falling in close behind him with his singular loss to S2J. If you think of Plup's 2 losses at Gammel as just an off tournament that's not indicative of his true level of consistency, you could very easily place him pretty high. Or if you think Mango's loss to Magi was just a fluke, you can very easily put him right next to Hungrybox, as they only share a sole loss to IBDW. But for me personally, Hungrybox takes the number 1 spot because of having the highest attendance of the remaining players while only having 1 bad loss. Behind him is Leffen, followed closely by Wizrobe, whose squeaky clean records make up for their lack of attendance. The last pair is the hardest, but because of Mango's loss to Magi being one of the worst losses by rank on this list, I give Plup the slight edge over him. So let's take a look at our first 2 lists side by side as we go into our third and final category, where we talk about each player's peak performances this year. These last couple of categories have been data heavy, but this one easily requires the most information to be accurately assessed. But fortunately, we can split these 8 players into 2 groups, players who have won majors and players who have not, to make the workload a little less strenuous. Let's start with the 4 who have not. Although he hasn't taken home a major win yet, Leffen has placed 3rd at every event he's attended so far this year, and has taken home at least one top 10 win at each of these events, creating an incredible looking 3-event resume. Plup has similar placings to fill up his top 3 events, but the wins he picked up on the way there aren't nearly as impressive, with Zayn and Amsa being the only top 10 players he beat on those runs. Amsa's peaks are much higher than you would expect across these 3 events that are sprinkled with a handful of top 20 wins. Lastly, we've got Zayn, who has 2 regional wins to his name at Come to Papa and Full Bloom that potentially pick up the slack left by his lack of standout major performances. For me, 5th best and 8th best are easy. Leffen's runs at all 3 of these events he's attended are incredible, and just one major win could easily shoot him up into the top 3 peaks for the year, and Plup's readouts just feel lukewarm compared to everyone else's here, earning him the title of having the worst peaks. Then I can see it going either way between Zayn and Amsa, with Zayn having the best singular performance at Come to Papa, and Amsa having 3 better performances overall than Zayn. I personally give the nod to Amsa for having 3 quality performances that came exclusively at majors, instead of Zayn's that came at regional events mostly. This then brings us to the top 4, who not only all have first place finishes, but all have crazy good runs. Hungrybox's big claim over his competitors is that he's the only one with 2 major wins, but some may discount his Genesis 6 win because of the lack of resistance he met on his way to grand finals. Wizrobe has the only 3 events he's attended so far this year listed, but he's done incredible at all 3, only taking 5 games to win a set once across all of these tournaments. And the amount of top players Axe had to run through at all these events to make it to grand finals is staggering, especially with the variety of different players he had to beat across these runs. Lastly, we have Mango's top-heavy resume that leans a lot on his flawless Gamma win, because his Pound and Genesis runs do leave a lot to be desired when compared to the other 3 fighting against him in this category. Which should make it no surprise that Mango has the 4th best peaks, and I could even see him being argued lower than Leffen depending on how heavily you weigh having a gold medal on one's resume. The rest of the list fills out pretty easily for me as well, with Axe taking the number 1 spot because no one can really stand up to the hit list of players he took sets off of across these 3 events. Hungrybox taking the 2nd spot close behind, even though his Genesis run is lacking, because he is the only player with 2 major wins under his belt, which leaves Wizzy the close-in at a respectable 3rd. That then fills in our 3rd and final sub list, which means it's finally time to rank these players, which just isn't as simple as averaging out all their placements on 3 lists. Everyone weighs peaks versus consistency different in their head, so there's a lot of valid lists that can be made, especially with how odd the top 10 is right now. But my personal top 8 looks like this. For me, the bottom 3 are clearly Plup, Zayn, and Amsa, but it's hard to pick an order to put them in because they're all so close to each other. But because of his slightly better consistency and head-to-head records, Plup takes the 6th spot for me. And the same mindset of consistency is what leads me to put Zayn slightly over Amsa at 7th, but honestly any order of these 3 is completely understandable. At 5th we have Mango, who's middle of the road about everything, with his win at Gamo being the biggest thing holding him up, and his loss against Magi being the biggest thing holding him down. At 4th we have Leffen, whose only real thing holding him back is the lack of attendance and a 1st place finish. Other than that, his year has been incredible, and there's definitely an argument for him and every player above him to be number 1 on this list. Coming in at 3rd we have Axe, who I wish I could put higher because of his incredible head-to-heads and peaks, but his litany of losses hurts his best player bid too much for me to put him any higher than 3rd at the moment. And for the first time in a very long time, we have Hungrybox at 2nd. Being the only player that have 2 major wins carries Hungrybox a long way currently, but he's not going to be the only one by the end of the year, so he's either got to start cleaning up those subpar head-to-head records or start winning more majors if he wants to be back on top by the end of the year. And it still feels surreal to say, but the best melee player in the world right now is Wizrobe. He won a super major with Falcon. His lowest placing is 4th. He has only losing records against 3 players. The major keys to him retaining the spot are continuing to not drop sets outside the top talent while increasing his attendance, and also finding some way to turn around his horrible all-time head-to-head records against both Plup and Mango. And that about does it for this video. If you're wondering who would be finishing out the top 10 at 9th and 10th, we're going to take a look at that exact question on next week's episode of The Ranking Show that will be streaming live on twitch.tv/SaveAsUntitled at 7 p.m. on Monday. Link down in the description to follow the channel. I'd also love to hear you argue for who you think deserves the #1 spot down in the comments. Just make sure you're respectful of other people's opinions and that you give your reasoning behind your choice. Also, if you enjoy my content and you would be interested in getting access to it early or getting a video made on a topic of your choice, consider supporting me on Patreon, which is linked down in the description. And that's about it. I've been SaveAsUntitled, and I'll see you guys next time.